the new god of disgrace, the new gods of disgrace, the new god of disgrace, the new goddess of disgrace, the new goddesses of disgrace, the new goddess of disgrace, the old god of disgrace, the old gods of disgrace, the old god of disgrace, the old goddess of disgrace, the old goddesses of disgrace, the old goddess of disgrace, the greater god of disgrace, the greater gods of disgrace, the greater god of disgrace, the greater goddess of disgrace, the greater goddesses of disgrace, the greater goddess of disgrace, the lesser god of disgrace, the lesser gods of disgrace, the lesser god of disgrace, the lesser goddess of disgrace, the lesser goddesses of disgrace, the lesser goddess of disgrace, the higher god of disgrace, the higher gods of disgrace, the higher god of disgrace, the higher goddess of disgrace, the higher goddesses of disgrace, the higher goddess of disgrace, the lower god of disgrace, the lower gods of disgrace, the lower god of disgrace, the lower goddess of disgrace, the lower goddesses of disgrace, the lower goddess of disgrace, the greater spirit of disgrace, the greater spirits of disgrace, the greater spirit of disgrace, the lesser spirit of disgrace, the lesser spirits of disgrace, the lesser spirit of disgrace, the higher spirit of disgrace, the higher spirits of disgrace, the higher spirit of disgrace, the lower spirit of disgrace, the lower spirits of disgrace, the lower spirit of disgrace, the major god of disgrace, the major gods of disgrace, the major god of disgrace, the major goddess of disgrace, the major goddesses of disgrace, the major goddess of disgrace, the minor god of disgrace, the minor gods of disgrace, the minor god of disgrace, the minor goddess of disgrace, the minor goddesses of disgrace, the minor goddess of disgrace, the superior god of disgrace, the superior gods of disgrace, the superior god of disgrace, the superior goddess of disgrace, the superior goddesses of disgrace, the superior goddess of disgrace, the inferior god of disgrace, the inferior gods of disgrace, the inferior god of disgrace, the inferior goddess of disgrace, the inferior goddesses of disgrace, the inferior goddess of disgrace, the ancestor god of disgrace, the ancestor gods of disgrace, the ancestor god of disgrace, the ancestor goddess of disgrace, the ancestor goddesses of disgrace, the ancestor goddess of disgrace, the ascendant god of disgrace, the ascendant gods of disgrace, the ascendant god of disgrace, the ascendant goddess of disgrace, the ascendant goddesses of disgrace, the ascendant goddess of disgrace, the descendant god of disgrace, the descendant gods of disgrace, the descendant god of disgrace, the descendant goddess of disgrace, the descendant goddesses of disgrace, the descendant goddess of disgrace, the transcendent god of disgrace, the transcendent gods of disgrace, the transcendent god of disgrace, the transcendent goddess of disgrace, the transcendent goddesses of disgrace, the transcendent goddess of disgrace, the past god of disgrace, the past gods of disgrace, the past god of disgrace, the past goddess of disgrace, the past goddesses of disgrace, the past goddess of disgrace, the present god of disgrace, the present gods of disgrace, the present god of disgrace, the present goddess of disgrace, the present goddesses of disgrace, the present goddess of disgrace, the future god of disgrace, the future gods of disgrace, the future god of disgrace, the future goddess of disgrace, the future goddesses of disgrace, the future goddess of disgrace, the authentic god of disgrace, the authentic gods of disgrace, the authentic god of disgrace, the authentic goddess of disgrace, the authentic goddesses of disgrace, the authentic goddess of disgrace, the synthetic god of disgrace, the synthetic gods of disgrace, the synthetic god of disgrace, the synthetic goddess of disgrace, the synthetic goddesses of disgrace, the synthetic goddess of disgrace, the progressive god of disgrace, the progressive gods of disgrace, the progressive god of disgrace, the progressive goddess of disgrace, the progressive goddesses of disgrace, the progressive goddess of disgrace, the regressive god of disgrace, the regressive gods of disgrace, the regressive god of disgrace, the regressive goddess of disgrace, the regressive goddesses of disgrace, the regressive goddess of disgrace, the ordinary god of disgrace, the ordinary gods of disgrace, the ordinary god of disgrace, the ordinary goddess of disgrace, the ordinary goddesses of disgrace, the ordinary goddess of disgrace, the extraordinary god of disgrace, the extraordinary gods of disgrace, the extraordinary god of disgrace, the extraordinary goddess of disgrace, the extraordinary goddesses of disgrace, the extraordinary goddess of disgrace, the static god of disgrace, the static gods of disgrace, the static god of disgrace, the static goddess of disgrace, the static goddesses of disgrace, the static goddess of disgrace, the dynamic god of disgrace, the dynamic gods of disgrace, the dynamic god of disgrace, the dynamic goddess of disgrace, the dynamic goddesses of disgrace, the dynamic goddess of disgrace, the land god of disgrace, the land gods of disgrace, the land god of disgrace, the land goddess of disgrace, the land goddesses of disgrace, the land goddess of disgrace, the sea god of disgrace, the sea gods of disgrace, the sea god of disgrace, the sea goddess of disgrace, the sea goddesses of disgrace, the sea goddess of disgrace, the sky god of disgrace, the sky gods of disgrace, the sky god of disgrace, the sky goddess of disgrace, the sky goddesses of disgrace, the sky goddess of disgrace, the god of disgrace, the gods of disgrace, the god of disgrace, the goddess of disgrace, the goddesses of disgrace, the goddess of disgrace, the half god of disgrace, the half gods of disgrace, the half god of disgrace, the half goddess of disgrace, the half goddesses of disgrace, the half goddess of disgrace, the vessel of disgrace, the vessels of disgrace, the vessel of disgrace, the name of disgrace, the names of disgrace, the name of disgrace, the person of disgrace, the persons of disgrace, the person of disgrace, the persona of disgrace, the personas of disgrace, the persona of disgrace, the personage of disgrace, the personages of disgrace, the personage of disgrace, the personality of disgrace, the personalities of disgrace, the personality of disgrace, the personification of disgrace, the personifications of disgrace, the personification of disgrace, the image of disgrace, the images of disgrace, the image of disgrace, the imagination of disgrace, the imaginations of disgrace, the imagination of disgrace, the belief of disgrace, the beliefs of disgrace, the belief of disgrace, the thought of disgrace, the thoughts of disgrace, the thought of disgrace, the word of disgrace, the words of disgrace, the word of disgrace, the action of disgrace, the actions of disgrace, the action of disgrace, the reaction of disgrace, the reactions of disgrace, the reaction of disgrace, the feeling of disgrace, the feelings of disgrace, the feeling of disgrace, the situation of disgrace, the situations of disgrace, the situation of disgrace, the circumstance of disgrace, the circumstances of disgrace, the circumstance of disgrace, the environment of disgrace, the environments of disgrace, the environment of disgrace, the relationship of disgrace, the relationships of disgrace, the relationship of disgrace, the number of disgrace, the numbers of disgrace, the number of disgrace, the formula of disgrace, the formulas of disgrace, the formula of disgrace, the equation of disgrace, the equations of disgrace, the equation of disgrace, the theory of disgrace, the theories of disgrace, the theory of disgrace, the symbol of disgrace, the symbols of disgrace, the symbol of disgrace, the color of disgrace, the colors of disgrace, the color of disgrace, the thing of disgrace, the things of disgrace, the thing of disgrace, the way of disgrace, the ways of disgrace, the way of disgrace, the place of disgrace, the places of disgrace, the place of disgrace, the time of disgrace, the times of disgrace, the time of disgrace, the event of disgrace, the events of disgrace, the event of disgrace, the result of disgrace, the results of disgrace, the result of disgrace, the crown of disgrace, the crowns of disgrace, the crown of disgrace, the throne of disgrace, the thrones of disgrace, the throne of disgrace, the disgrace king, the disgrace kings, the disgrace kingdom, the disgrace kingdoms, the disgrace king's subject, the disgrace king's subjects, the disgrace king's dominion, the disgrace king's dominions, the kingdom of disgrace, the kingdoms of disgrace, the kingdom of disgrace, the disgrace queen, the disgrace queens, the disgrace queendom, the disgrace queendoms, the disgrace queen's subject, the disgrace queen's subjects, the disgrace queen's dominion, the disgrace queen's dominions, the queendom of disgrace, the queendoms of disgrace, the queendom of disgrace, the disgrace prince, the disgrace princes, the disgrace princedom, the disgrace princedoms, the disgrace prince's subject, the disgrace prince's subjects, the disgrace prince's dominion, the disgrace prince's dominions, the princedom of disgrace, the princedoms of disgrace, the princedom of disgrace, the disgrace princess, the disgrace princesses, the disgrace princessdom, the disgrace princessdoms, the disgrace princess's subject, the disgrace princess's subjects, the disgrace princess's dominion, the disgrace princess's dominions, the princessdom of disgrace, the princessdoms of disgrace, the princessdom of disgrace, the lord of disgrace, the lords of disgrace, the lord of disgrace, the lordess of disgrace, the lordesses of disgrace, the lordess of disgrace, the priest of disgrace, the priests of disgrace, the priest of disgrace, the priestess of disgrace, the priestesses of disgrace, the priestess of disgrace, the ritual of disgrace, the rituals of disgrace, the ritual of disgrace, the shrine of disgrace, the shrines of disgrace, the shrine of disgrace, the temple of disgrace, the temples of disgrace, the temple of disgrace, the leader of disgrace, the leaders of disgrace, the leader of disgrace, the follower of disgrace, the followers of disgrace, the follower of disgrace, the natural substance of disgrace, the natural substances of disgrace, the natural substance of disgrace, the supernatural substance of disgrace, the supernatural substances of disgrace, the supernatural substance of disgrace, the temporal substance of disgrace, the temporal substances of disgrace, the temporal substance of disgrace, the spiritual substance of disgrace, the spiritual substances of disgrace, the spiritual substance of disgrace, the natural form of disgrace, the natural forms of disgrace, the natural form of disgrace, the supernatural form of disgrace, the supernatural forms of disgrace, the supernatural form of disgrace, the temporal form of disgrace, the temporal forms of disgrace, the temporal form of disgrace, the spiritual form of disgrace, the spiritual forms of disgrace, the spiritual form of disgrace, the age of disgrace, the ages of disgrace, the age of disgrace, the era of disgrace, the heiress of disgrace, the era of disgrace, the awakener of disgrace, the awakeners of disgrace, the awakener of disgrace, the awakening of disgrace, the awakenings of disgrace, the awakening of disgrace, the realm of disgrace, the realms of disgrace, the realm of disgrace, the dimension of disgrace, the dimensions of disgrace, the dimension of disgrace, the zone of disgrace, the zones of disgrace, the zone of disgrace, the frequency of disgrace, the frequencies of disgrace, the frequency of disgrace, the century of disgrace, the centuries of disgrace, the century of disgrace, the millennium of disgrace, the millenniums of disgrace, the millennium of disgrace, the purpose of disgrace, the purposes of disgrace, the purpose of disgrace, the meaning of disgrace, the meanings of disgrace, the meaning of disgrace, the culture of disgrace, the cultures of disgrace, the culture of disgrace, the demonstrator of disgrace, the demonstrators of disgrace, the demonstrator of disgrace, the demonstration of disgrace, the demonstrations of disgrace, the demonstration of disgrace, the manifester of disgrace, the manifestors of disgrace, the manifester of disgrace, The manifestation of disgrace. The manifestations of disgrace. The manifestation of disgrace. The presence of disgrace. The presences of disgrace. The presence of disgrace. The glow of disgrace. The glows of disgrace. The glow of disgrace. The goal of disgrace. The goals of disgrace. The goal of disgrace. The plan of disgrace. The plans of disgrace. The plan of disgrace. The book of disgrace. The books of disgrace. The book of disgrace. The philosopher of disgrace. The philosophers of disgrace. The philosopher of disgrace. The philosophy of disgrace. The philosophies of disgrace. The philosophy of disgrace. The releaser of disgrace. The releasers of disgrace. The releaser of disgrace. The release of disgrace. The releases of disgrace. The release of disgrace. The variable of disgrace. The variables of disgrace. The variable of disgrace. The cause of disgrace. The causes of disgrace. The cause of disgrace. The effect of disgrace. The effects of disgrace. The effect of disgrace. The journey of disgrace. The journeys of disgrace. The journey of disgrace. The emergence of disgrace. The emergences of disgrace. The emergence of disgrace. The source of disgrace. The sources of disgrace. The source of disgrace. The originator of disgrace. The originators of disgrace. The originator of disgrace. The origin of disgrace. The origins of disgrace. The origin of disgrace. The forefather of disgrace. The forefathers of disgrace. The forefather of disgrace. The foremother of disgrace. The foremothers of disgrace. The foremother of disgrace. The ancestor of disgrace. The ancestors of disgrace. The ancestor of disgrace. The descendant of disgrace. The descendants of disgrace. The descendant of disgrace. The lineage of disgrace. The lineages of disgrace. The lineage of disgrace. The heritage of disgrace. The heritages of disgrace. The heritage of disgrace. The heir of disgrace. The heirs of disgrace. The heir of disgrace. The co-heir of disgrace. The co-heirs of disgrace. The co-heir of disgrace. The joint heir of disgrace. The joint heirs of disgrace. The joint heir of disgrace. The dynasty of disgrace. The dynasties of disgrace. The dynasty of disgrace. The force of disgrace. The forces of disgrace. The force of disgrace. The law of disgrace. The laws of disgrace. The law of disgrace. The pact of disgrace. The pacts of disgrace. The pact of disgrace. The game of disgrace. The games of disgrace. The game of disgrace. The mask of disgrace. The masks of disgrace. The mask of disgrace. The armor of disgrace. The armors of disgrace. The armor of disgrace. The sword of disgrace. The swords of disgrace. The sword of disgrace. The shield of disgrace. The shields of disgrace. The shield of disgrace. The force shield of disgrace. The force shields of disgrace. The force shield of disgrace. The armored force shield of disgrace. The armored force shields of disgrace. The armored force shield of disgrace. The champion of disgrace. The champions of disgrace. The champion of disgrace. The guardian of disgrace. The guardians of disgrace. The guardian of disgrace. The defender of disgrace. The defenders of disgrace. The defender of disgrace. The protector of disgrace. The protectors of disgrace. The protector of disgrace. The chant of disgrace. The chants of disgrace. The chant of disgrace. The shape of disgrace. The shapes of disgrace. The shape of disgrace. The cube of disgrace. The cubes of disgrace. The cube of disgrace. The cuboid of disgrace. The cuboids of disgrace. The cuboid of disgrace. The sphere of disgrace. The spheres of disgrace. The sphere of disgrace. The spheroid of disgrace. The spheroids of disgrace. The spheroid of disgrace. The prism of disgrace. The prisms of disgrace. The prism of disgrace. The pyramid of disgrace. The pyramids of disgrace. The pyramid of disgrace. The cylinder of disgrace. The cylinders of disgrace. The cylinder of disgrace. The cone of disgrace. The cones of disgrace. The cone of disgrace. The triangle of disgrace. The triangles of disgrace. The triangle of disgrace. The circle of disgrace. The circles of disgrace. The circle of disgrace. The semicircle of disgrace. The semicircles of disgrace. The semicircle of disgrace. The square of disgrace. The squares of disgrace. The square of disgrace. The rectangle of disgrace. The rectangles of disgrace. The rectangle of disgrace. The parallelogram of disgrace. The parallelograms of disgrace. The parallelogram of disgrace. The rhombus of disgrace. The rhombuses of disgrace. The rhombus of disgrace. The trapezoid of disgrace. The trapezoids of disgrace. The trapezoid of disgrace. The polygon of disgrace. The polygons of disgrace. The polygon of disgrace. The pentagon of disgrace. The pentagons of disgrace. The pentagon of disgrace. The hexagon of disgrace. The hexagons of disgrace. The hexagon of disgrace. The septagon of disgrace. The septagons of disgrace. The septagon of disgrace. The octagon of disgrace. The octagons of disgrace. The octagon of disgrace. The nonagon of disgrace. The nonagons of disgrace. The nonagon of disgrace. The decagon of disgrace. The decagons of disgrace. The decagon of disgrace. The evolution of disgrace. The evolutions of disgrace. The evolution of disgrace. The revolution of disgrace. The revolutions of disgrace. The revolution of disgrace. The elemental art of disgrace. The elemental arts of disgrace. The elemental art of disgrace. The elemental science of disgrace. The elemental sciences of disgrace. The elemental science of disgrace. The elemental principle of disgrace. The elemental principles of disgrace. The elemental principle of disgrace. The elemental technology of disgrace. The elemental technologies of disgrace. The elemental technology of disgrace. The low elemental art of disgrace. The low elemental arts of disgrace. The low elemental art of disgrace. The low elemental science of disgrace. The low elemental sciences of disgrace. The low elemental science of disgrace. The low elemental principle of disgrace. The low elemental principles of disgrace. The low elemental principle of disgrace. The low elemental technology of disgrace. The low elemental technologies of disgrace. The low elemental technology of disgrace. The high elemental art of disgrace. The high elemental arts of disgrace. The high elemental art of disgrace. The high elemental science of disgrace. The high elemental sciences of disgrace. The high elemental science of disgrace. The high elemental principle of disgrace. The high elemental principles of disgrace. The high elemental principle of disgrace. The high elemental technology of disgrace. The high elemental technologies of disgrace. The high elemental technology of disgrace. The agent of disgrace. The agents of disgrace. The agent of disgrace. The agency of disgrace. The agencies of disgrace. The agency of disgrace. The amplifier of disgrace. The amplifiers of disgrace. The amplifier of disgrace. The amplification of disgrace. The amplifications of disgrace. The amplification of disgrace. The enhancer of disgrace. The enhancers of disgrace. The enhancer of disgrace. The enhancement of disgrace. The enhancements of disgrace. The enhancement of disgrace. The magnifier of disgrace. The magnifiers of disgrace. The magnifier of disgrace. The magnification of disgrace. The magnifications of disgrace. The magnification of disgrace. The influencer of disgrace. The influencers of disgrace. The influencer of disgrace. The influence of disgrace. The influences of disgrace. The influence of disgrace. The emanator of disgrace. The emanators of disgrace. The emanator of disgrace. The emanation of disgrace. The emanations of disgrace. The emanation of disgrace. The converger of disgrace. The convergers of disgrace. The converger of disgrace. The convergence of disgrace. The convergences of disgrace. The convergence of disgrace. The aura of disgrace. The auras of disgrace. The aura of disgrace. The impression of disgrace. The impressions of disgrace. The impression of disgrace. The intelligence of disgrace. The intelligences of disgrace. The intelligence of disgrace. The sophistication of disgrace. The sophistications of disgrace. The sophistication of disgrace. The genius of disgrace. The geniuses of disgrace. The genius of disgrace, the polymath of disgrace. The polymaths of disgrace. The polymath of disgrace, the psychic of disgrace. The psychics of disgrace. The psychic of disgrace, the knowledge of disgrace. The knowledges of disgrace. The knowledge of disgrace, the understanding of disgrace. The understandings of disgrace. The understanding of disgrace, the wisdom of disgrace. The wisdoms of disgrace. The wisdom of disgrace, the secret of disgrace. The secrets of disgrace. The secret of disgrace, the mystery of disgrace. The mysteries of disgrace. The mystery of disgrace, the revelation of disgrace. The revelations of disgrace. The revelation of disgrace, the tactic of disgrace. The tactics of disgrace. The tactic of disgrace, the strategy of disgrace. The strategies of disgrace. The strategy of disgrace, the strength of disgrace. The strengths of disgrace. The strength of disgrace, the might of disgrace. The mights of disgrace. The might of disgrace, the power of disgrace. The powers of disgrace. The power of disgrace, the authority of disgrace. The authorities of disgrace. The authority of disgrace, the dominion of disgrace. The dominions of disgrace. The dominion of disgrace, the rhythm of disgrace. The rhythms of disgrace. The rhythm of disgrace, the melody of disgrace. The melodies of disgrace. The melody of disgrace, the music of disgrace. The musics of disgrace. The music of disgrace, the lyric of disgrace. The lyrics of disgrace. The lyric of disgrace, the song of disgrace. The songs of disgrace. The song of disgrace, the dance of disgrace. The dances of disgrace. The dance of disgrace, the spirit of disgrace. The spirits of disgrace. The spirit of disgrace, the soul of disgrace. The souls of disgrace. The soul of disgrace, the body of disgrace. The bodies of disgrace. The body of disgrace, the mark of disgrace. The marks of disgrace. The mark of disgrace, the promise of disgrace. The promises of disgrace. The promise of disgrace, the visionary of disgrace. The visionaries of disgrace. The visionary of disgrace, the vision of disgrace. The visions of disgrace. The vision of disgrace, the picture of disgrace. The pictures of disgrace. The picture of disgrace, the sound of disgrace. The sounds of disgrace. The sound of disgrace, the dung of disgrace. The dungs of disgrace. The dung of disgrace, the language of disgrace. The languages of disgrace. The language of disgrace, the communication of disgrace. The communications of disgrace. The communication of disgrace, the people of disgrace. The peoples of disgrace. The people of disgrace, the society of disgrace. The societies of disgrace. The society of disgrace, the fortress of disgrace. The fortresses of disgrace. The fortress of disgrace, the government of disgrace. The governments of disgrace. The government of disgrace, the city of disgrace. The cities of disgrace. The city of disgrace, the nation of disgrace. The nations of disgrace. The nation of disgrace, the civilization of disgrace. The civilizations of disgrace. The civilization of disgrace, the world of disgrace. The worlds of disgrace. The world of disgrace,